Hi, I'm Scott Francis, editor of Products Finishing Magazine. I'm here with Michael Guckes, chief economist and director of analytics for Gardner Intelligence, the research arm of Gardner Business Media. Michael authors the Finishing Index column for Products Finishing, and we thought we'd check in for some insights into business activity in the finishing industry. Michael, this month you're reporting that the index is at a 2-year high, signaling expansion. Can you elaborate on what your data means?
Absolutely. Scott, first, thanks so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. So I'll get right to it. This month here in September, we saw the index reach 53.1. That is a more than 2-year high. The last time we saw numbers even close to this range was back in the first quarter of 2019. The good thing about this number is that it was so broad-based. When we ask our survey participants, that is finishers, across the United States, what's happening with their businesses. We've seen in the last 2 months, those finishers telling us that new orders are finally improving on a month-over-month basis. They're telling us that their production is following suit, so production is also expanding. They've told us in the last 2 months as well that they're seeing a little bit of growth in employment. Certainly, there's no longer the bleeding in employment that we saw previously. And then lastly, we've seen backlogs improve. So really what we're left to see is export orders improve. Those are still on a slowing contraction. And then lastly, I want to get into supplier deliveries. That number is a little bit of a difficult number to understand during this whole COVID era. And the reason being is that when you look at this survey, it says our supplier deliveries slower, the same, or faster. It's asked in a different way than all of our other questions. And the reason being is because when there's very strong demand for finishing goods, the upstream goods, the paints, the powders, the equipment, all the things that the finishers need, they all will go and ask their supply chains for those resources, usually at the same time in an upcycle. And what happens is of course, those suppliers become a little overwhelmed with those orders. There's a growing backlog up the supply chain, and then that means that supplier deliveries actually slow down because they just cannot fulfill all those orders in time. So what we've done here is we've excluded in this chart here the supplier deliveries impact from the GBI. And so if we were to calculate the GBI without supplier deliveries, because it's an inflated number and doesn't work as it normally does, you can see here that we're still seeing expansionary growth. The number would not have been 53.1 for September, it would have been 52. But again, going back in time, it still would have been a 2-year high if you look at the history of the GBI, less supplier delivery. So again, it's encouraging news. And again, it reemphasizes that point that we're seeing a broad-based gain in the finishing sector.
So Michael, are there particular end markets that are showing more improvement than others?
Yeah, Scott, there surely are. If you look at the data that we have by end market, we track roughly 20 different end markets through our data, and there are many that have been expanding since July. Surprisingly, it's been led by aerospace. Aerospace, however, was struggling before COVID, but the industry has made some good gains here since July. That's been followed by custom processors, petroleum, chemicals processors, form fabricators in the metal sector, and then of course medical here just recently came up back above the 50 line, so it's no longer experiencing slowing contraction but some expanding growth. And then you have automotive, which eked out a small gain here over 50 here in September, which was really encouraging to see because we all know the importance of the automotive sector on finishing. There are a few sectors, as you can see here, that continue to experience slowing contraction. A lot of those are on the metal side, metal cutting job shops, machinery and primary metals. And so, again, this is just part of that broad-based, I think, recovery that we're just now starting to see in the finishing market. Not only is it taking place across all of those various business metrics, but it's taking place across a pretty good number of the end markets that are so critical to finishers.
So I want to get into what this means for companies. When I talk to folks, it seems like maybe larger companies are able to weather the storm. Smaller companies are able to make quick pivots and try and maybe adjust their business. How does company size affect what we're seeing?
Yeah, Scott, no doubt. We do see a bias towards the larger firms. They've weathered this whole event a bit better than the smaller firms. Some of that may be that they have better control over their supply chains. Some of it may be that they simply get fed first. Sometimes we've seen in some markets where the larger firms take priority. If there's work that they can't get to in a timely fashion, then that work would fall to a smaller firm or a different tiered firm. Uh, in the case here, what we've seen is that the largest firms have rebounded much more strongly than the mid-size and smaller firms under 50 employees in size. In fact, the smaller firms still are reporting slowing contraction, but as you can see here, they're very close to that 50 line. So hopefully what we're seeing among the smallest firms is that the bleeding has at least stopped. And hopefully in the coming quarter, they're going to see some modest gains is what we hope for.
As we kind of wrap up here, do you have advice for shops based on all of this data? Things that they maybe should think about or strategies that can kind of help them as we continue to try to rebound from all this?
Yeah, Scott, there are a few things that my team has been recommending for a long time, and this goes all the way back to the Great Recession, but the importance of diversification is one of them. There were a lot of firms during the Great Recession that were only operating in one end market. Whether you were big or small, it didn't matter. But the fact was that those firms that were operating in a single end market, they had essentially tied their firm's fate to those end markets. And that could be really challenging for some of them. There were a lot of good shops and finishers that maybe struggled more than they had to because they were tied to one end market. The lesson learned out of the Great Recession, I think, is the same one we can learn here, which is that it's always good to diversify, to have maybe 2, if not 3 different end markets that you're serving, because it allows you to manage the volatility that comes through in each one of those specific end markets. It allows you to kind of ride the waves as they come to you, rather than being hit by one large wave all at once. And so we do recommend that. And like you said too, be creative in where you're looking for your work. One of the things that we've been talking a lot about is the importance of networks in different end markets, right? So let's look at automotive real quick, right? Think about all the electrical vehicle markets that are coming on, electric vehicle manufacturers that are coming to market, the software guys that are trying to build software and all the electronics into these new autonomous vehicles. These create huge networks for which they need manufacturing assistance. They need someone to tell them, here's how I can help you. And they don't always know where to go. And so being able to think creatively about these markets, not just going to the classic OEMs or the classic tier 1 suppliers looking for work, but trying to get creative, looking at, how can you partner with an electronics firm to do finishing work for them because they have a sensor, a camera, et cetera, that they want to bring into the EV market, right? And so that's just one example. Of course, the same thing is happening in many markets, because all of these markets, whether it's automotive, aerospace, electronics, whatever, they're all advancing, they're all growing, they're all making new advances. All of those advances require finishing solutions. And so that's really the best advice I can provide.
Thanks, Michael. We really appreciate all of your insights. For more news and trends in the finishing industry, visit pfonline.com.
Yeah, Scott, again, thank you so much for your time. And if your readers want to learn more about the GBI or how they can use it to take advantage of market trends, they can always visit our website too at gardnerintelligence.com. Thank you again, Scott.
Thanks.